So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and I'll put the PowerPoint up right now. Matt, there you go.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. And members of the City Council, thank you very much for having me here this evening. I appreciate it. I'm going to check and see if this works now and I can advance the slide. Yes, I can. Okay. Excellent. Oh, I'm sorry. This might be the wrong one there, Patrick. I think there's a more updated one on there.
This is March 12th.
Yeah, this is
Oh, is it?
1950.
Oh, there we go. Nope. I'm sorry.
Yep.
You're right. You're right.
The picture kind of
Picture
throws
looks
you.
old, yeah.
It looks a little older from the photo.
It's not from 1950. I don't think they had PowerPoint in 1950, so that should have clued me in right there. I'll start again. Thank you so much, members of the council, for having me here this evening. Again, I'm Matt Koshin. I'm with the Rice Creek Watershed District. I am the Lake and Stream Program Manager there, which means I work on water quality issues and I work on water quality studies and projects like this Golden Lake Fisheries Assessment that we just completed. So I'm here tonight. I've got a few slides to share. I think maybe I'll be talking for about 15 minutes or so. Happy to answer any questions about that. I know there may be some other questions that I don't quite cover in all of the slides here. Happy to go into whatever topic you want to discuss as it relates to Golden Lake and water quality. So first off, just a couple of notes about what the Rice Creek Watershed District is, who we are. We have about 16 full-time staff. It's a fairly large area. I'm going to skip up to our map here. And if you look at this map here, this is the entirety of the Rice Creek watershed. It kind of forms like an upside-down U, going from Roseville down in the southwestern corner all the way up to Forest Lake, and then around to White Bear Lake and White Bear Township. So Circle Pines is kind of right in the center of that. We have roughly 55 lakes, depending on your definition of lakes, in the Rice Creek watershed. 186 square miles. It is a big area. There's lots of different issues that we deal with at Rice Creek Watershed District. Drainage, wetland management and regulation, and then water quality. Again, that's what I work on. So that's just a brief overview of who we are. But what I'm really here to talk about tonight are the results of this Golden Lake Fisheries Assessment, or I'm calling it the CARP survey, as Patrick did, and then talk generally about water quality in Golden Lake. What's the current conditions, how have things changed, and some of those details. So first off, this term water quality. I say that I work on water quality issues. To some people, that might mean they're thinking about drinking water quality, what's coming out of their tap, or it might mean mercury in fish tissue, some of those issues. When I use the term water quality, what I'm really referring to is water clarity in lakes, and it's really driven by kind of this simple calculus or water quality 101 that's up on the screen here. It's mostly about phosphorus. When you take clear water, and add phosphorus to it, generally that generates more algae growth. Phosphorus is considered a limiting nutrient, meaning that what's limiting more algae from growing is phosphorus. So when you add more phosphorus, you get more algae. That's something that we can measure in Golden Lake, and I'll talk more about that later. Chlorophyll A is a direct measure of the amount of algae that can be fueled in there, and we also look at water clarity with a Secchi disc. So that's what I mean when I say water clarity. Now when we start thinking about, well, what are the possible sources of phosphorus to the lake? If I'm concerned about algae in my lake and I know that it's driven by phosphorus, where is that phosphorus coming from? It can come from external sources, like stormwater runoff, like agricultural fields, like feedlots, things like that. Or it can come from internal sources, like sediment phosphorus in the bottom of the lake. Phosphorus can be recycled out of the sediments in the bottom of the lake. And then common carp can also play a big role in phosphorus dynamics and recycling phosphorus in a lake. So that's what I'm going to be talking about with the first couple of slides here related to internal sources of phosphorus. And it's this issue. Oh, I'll note really quick, just so people don't get confused here. Carp have been in the news a lot the past year or two. Mostly related to the Mississippi River and some of the silver and bighead carp that are being caught by commercial fishermen down there. That's not what we're talking about surveying Golden Lake for. We're talking about common carp, Saprinus carpio. This is a fish that's been in North America for over 100 years. They've been here for a long time, but they are an invasive species. But the issue with these fish, they are an invasive species, yes, but the reason that we care about them is because they cause water quality issues. They create and exacerbate algae blooms. So they change phosphorus dynamics in a lake, they destroy native aquatic plants, and they fuel algae growth. So this is the reason that we're concerned about them, is the water quality link there, and that's why we did this fisheries assessment. It's important to note that when it comes to carp, their impact on a lake is related to their density. So there are plenty of lakes out there that have a small number of carp, and they don't really cause any problems. White Bear Lake comes to mind. They have excellent water clarity in White Bear Lake. We know that some carp live in White Bear Lake. But research that came out of the University of Minnesota a little over 10 years ago now is telling us that that threshold is roughly 100 kilograms per hectare or 80 pounds per acre, if I remember the conversion correctly. So when you have densities of carp above that, they tend to cause water quality problems. When the density is below that, they tend not to. So then that leads us to our question, are carp a problem in Golden Lake? We didn't know. There are DNR fisheries surveys out there, but DNR fisheries surveys are not designed to answer this question, are carp a problem, or what is the carp density? There's a special survey, which I'll talk about, that you can use to determine a carp density in a lake. So we didn't know the answer to this question. We did this study. Patrick mentioned that the Rice Creek Watershed District funded this. We have a carp management program at Rice Creek Watershed. In many parts of our watershed, carp are a big problem, and we're managing them aggressively. Because we didn't know the answer to this question in Golden Lake, are they a problem, the first step is doing the survey, determining what the density is. So the way to do the carp survey in Golden Lake, there's multiple ways to do it, but the most efficient and kind of first check way to do it is with an electrofishing boat. So this is what was done on Golden Lake this past summer. That picture on the top is not the electrofishing boat from WSB. That's just a generalized picture, but that is what they look like. And the way that it works is it generates a mild electrical current in the water sufficient to stun fish, but not kill them. The fish are netted, as you can see in that lower picture there, and then counted and measured, and all of that goes into a big spreadsheet to calculate density of fish. The map there shows the area where the electrofishing was done, so it was pretty much all the way around Golden Lake this electrofishing survey occurred. And then the big drum roll results. This is a little bit anticlimactic. They did not catch a single carp in Golden Lake as part of this survey. That's not terribly unusual, but a little bit. Most of our lakes, when we go out on with an electrofishing boat, they're able to catch at least one or two in a low-density lake. The fact that they didn't catch any in Golden Lake, it doesn't give us an exact, because we don't have any fish, we can't calculate a population estimate. If we caught 2 or 3 or something like that, there's a equation that you can use to generate a population estimate. Because they didn't catch any, we don't know what it is. All we know is that there are very few or maybe none in the lake. I would say it's pretty rare that in any lake that there would be none. More likely there's just a few and they're not successfully reproducing. So that's what we know about the carp population in Golden Lake. A little bit anticlimactic, but it's good news, certainly, that there are no carp in the lake.
So I noticed
Yes, sir.
you fished along the shoreline. I'm not a fisher person, but do they hang out along the shoreline or do they hang in deeper water?
Yeah, most definitely they hang out around the shoreline, especially in the middle of the summer. Other times of the year they might venture out into deeper water, but they tend to be a very shallow water species. Yep,
So I see a lot of guys fishing them from shore on rivers to catch them.
yep,
Hang out right on the shoreline.
yeah.
And this is kind of the current snapshot. I think in my memory, we had serious carp problems in the past. I think we used, is it rotenone or something to do a fish kill of the lake in the 80s, I think. Where we
Interesting.
just sort of, I'm going to use the term nuked, that's not the right term, but
Yeah.
sort of killed all the fish in the lake because
Yeah.
of a carp problem. But, that could have been effective, but the bottom line is we don't have that kind of problem now of them being in there, rooting up the bottom, getting that phosphorus up into the water column.
Definitely not a problem right now. That's interesting. I didn't know that about the 80s. That would have been before Rice Creek was working on issues like this, but that is something that the DNR used to do back in the day, was what they would call a reclaim or a reclamation project to kill all of the fish in a lake and then start fresh.
Yeah, and then they put walleye in, which only lasted about a year or two between one or two things. First off, they got fished out. It was a
Yeah.
wonderful experience for a year or two, from my understanding, in the early 80s. And then the second off, it just isn't the right lake for it. The bottom is not sandy and there's not a lot of rocks and stuff, so it just they didn't reproduce and they got fished out and they died out.
Sure.
So,
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Next question that would come up then from this survey, what else was caught in the lake? Of course, this electrofishing boat is not selective for carp. any fish that would be inhabiting those nearshore areas would be captured as part of this survey. So the survey report, which I think you have, and it sounds like will be posted later, has a lot of details on this. Handful of species caught there. By far the most abundant was bluegill. There's some other sunfish species in there, like I think green sunfish and pumpkin seed. Northern pike were observed but not caught. Largemouth bass, I think they caught a fair amount of, including bass up to 18 inches, which is 2 to 3 pounds. They definitely inhabit that nearshore area and would be swept up in this survey. So good to see that there is a diverse mix of native fish living in the lake. There are some predatory or piscivorous fish living in the lake, like bass and northern pike. That's a good thing for the overall ecology of the lake. Interesting to see. One thing that I'd note here in the report that you have before you on page 6, there's a couple different tables in there that compare the last DNR survey to this current electrofishing survey. Interesting to do that, not exactly an apples to apples comparison. When the DNR comes out to do a fishery survey in a lake, they're using either trap nets or gill nets. That's a very different gear type than an electrofishing boat, and so the results that they generate are different. So comparing those, so for example, on table 1 there, largemouth bass went from a percentage of 1.3% of the total catch up to 13% of the total catch, which you could interpret as largemouth bass population is increasing in the lake. I would be hesitant to draw that conclusion simply because this is a different gear type. Electrofishing boats are more likely to catch largemouth bass in those shallow areas than perhaps the DNR gear are. So that's what I have for the fisheries survey. Of course, I'm happy to answer any more questions about that. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to some of the water quality slides in Golden Lake.
Any more fish questions from the group here? Patrick?
I think it's all in all a great result of the study. That's kind of what we were looking for.
Yeah, I was kind of curious to see, I see in the report here that you didn't get any catfish. The DNR did have some in their survey 6 years ago. I think the last time I saw a catfish caught on Golden Lake was probably about 4 or 5 years back. So, do they typically hang out in the shallows too, or are they more of deep water fish?
They can be in shallow water. I think they'll move back and forth. It's my understanding, although I'd have to double check this to be sure, that channel catfish were stocked in many metro area lakes in the 80s and 90s, perhaps including
Even in the 2000s.
Even into the 2000s. Okay.
That was their main thing, trying to eat, I think,
Yeah.
the bullheads and maybe the carp, if there were any carp, but eat the bullheads.
Yep.
Channel cat was stocked, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I've heard that on many other lakes as well. Channel catfish were stocked to try and control roughish populations. I've not seen any scientific literature that kind of backs that up, and I think that fisheries offices have moved away from that practice, perhaps as a result of that, but that would be interesting to learn more about, I think.
One thing before you go on, Matt, you want to tell them about another hypothesis you guys have about how the panfish are kind of maybe keeping down the carp population
Yeah.
because that's their main sources of food.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Thanks for the cue there. Some other interesting research. I mentioned that this research right here came out of the University of Minnesota. The U of M actually did a series of very interesting studies on common carp from about 2009 to 2016 or so. This was one of the findings, that carp impacts are related to their density. Another was that carp tend to flourish and exist in really high numbers, really high densities in lakes where there is access to unstable winter kill habitat. So, for example, in another part of our watershed, Long Lake in New Brighton is connected to a whole series of shallow lakes that winter kills pretty frequently, not every year, but almost every year. Winter kill, by the way, is the phenomenon where in shallow lakes they can run out of oxygen in the winter and all of the fish or many of the fish in the lake will die. So when ice goes out, you'll see a bunch of dead fish. That's winter kill. What the U of M found was that in lakes where deep lakes were connected to shallow lakes, winter kill lakes, carp will migrate into those winter kill lakes every year and successfully spawn. Their eggs will hatch and grow and their numbers multiply. When they don't have access to those unstable habitats, which appears to be the case in Golden Lake, Panfish are actually great predators for carp eggs. So the U of M did some really interesting studies where they excluded fish, included fish, had fish spawning, had vegetation, no vegetation, excuse me, and found pretty conclusively that when carp don't have access to that unstable winter kill habitat, they tend not to flourish and exist in really high numbers. And that appears to be the case in Golden Lake.
Yeah, and of course, we aerate the lake, have an aeration system.
An aeration
Make sure
system.
we do that.
Yes.
And we have plenty of bluegill and crappie to eat all the carp eggs, so.
Right.
Yes.
And I moved in 1997, and a couple of years before then, a person caught a 14-pound northern in the lake, which was promoted in the local newspapers. You know, that was a pretty big deal.
Sure.
Big fish.
Big fish.
The,
Not big anymore in there.
maybe not.
You never know.
Yeah.
The connectivity issue, though, and access to spawning habitat has some important implications for, there's the small weir that links the upstream pond to Golden Lake. If there were ever talks about modifying that or removing that, which would increase connectivity to some winter kill habitat, that might be cause for alarm or cause to consider some short-term controls in that area.
Yeah, a lot of that.
How does that work? Because that weir's upstream from Golden Lake, so can't fish just go over the top of it as the water is spilling through there?
Potentially, yes. It depends on how deep the water is on the downstream side. In order for fish to jump over a structure, you know, depending on how high the structure is, they'll need a certain amount of water depth in order to make the jump. It sure seems like, just based on the results of this study, that either they're not able to access it, or they can access it, but so can the panfish, but not mutually exclusive. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we've got that weir on the south side, and I think that's always been really productive in keeping fish from coming up from Rice Creek and getting into Golden Lake.
That's quite a bit higher, right?
Yeah.
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 it is a lot
Yes.
higher.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and it's interesting, and we should, you know, make a note from a staff perspective that, you know, if both those weirs have been talked about, first off, the weir at the south end where the lake goes out has been talked about as far as if we were ever going to do a drawdown, that weir doesn't allow that, right? So we would have to change that weir and, in a sense, be able to, you know, pull a plank out and lower it kind of thing or something. It doesn't have that now. So if we ever did that, we would want to make sure that we do it to, you know, to allow the lake to draw down if that was a goal, but also then that would still stop the fish from coming up. And the same thing with the one at the top, you know, off of the pond up here, that sometimes is, you know, had problems as far as, you know, it gets beat up, it's old, it's been a long time. You could see a time in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years where it needs to be replaced.
Yeah.
Just maybe for effectiveness. And when it's done, it's, instead of just being, well, just replace it, it should be replaced with this kind of thinking in mind
Yes.
of how do we make sure that it's an effective guard, you know, either way or whatever.
It'd be interesting to see if there's actually any fish in the stormwater pond.
Yeah, coming
Yeah.
into the lake. Because
That-
it's a
that'd be coming
total of
in.
6 feet deep, 5, 6.
Yeah, I mean,
At its
it's,
best. It's doing its job of filling
doing
up
its
with
job.
sediment coming down Rice Creek. We have done some digging out of it. We have more to do over the next handful or dozen
oh,
years.
yeah.
Because it's doing its job. Now, of course, from a resident's perspective, people who live above the townhomes, they thought it was an amenity. And of course, it gets full, and it's very green and very full of algae in the summertime. And it's actually doing its job,
Yeah.
right, of keeping it up there.
Yes.
Not, if you live across from it, it's not, but that was what it was put there for. It would be nice to clean that up, but it's doing its job, and that's, you know, so it's not really a lake, and it's not an amenity, it's a stormwater retention pond.
Sure. Sure. Good questions and comments. Thank you very much. All right, I'll move on to some of the water quality updates I have for Golden Lake. Again, just getting back to this concept of we're concerned with phosphorus, with chlorophyll A, with water clarity. Those are all things that we measure in Golden Lake. Either myself or other members of our staff at Rice Creek were out on Golden Lake about every 2 weeks during the open water period, collecting water samples, taking measurements, and analyzing it to produce these very detailed graphs. So if you're into data, the next couple of slides will be for you. This is a graph right here showing results of total phosphorus and chlorophyll A in Golden Lake going all the way back to 1976 and then up to present day. So we have quite a bit of monitoring data on this lake, really an impressive record of monitoring data. Those blue bars indicate the average amount of phosphorus in any given year. The green bars indicate the average amount of chlorophyll A in any given year. And then those horizontal lines indicate a state standard. So the state of Minnesota sets water quality standards, parameters for all lakes in the state, saying you should have less than this amount of phosphorus or less than this amount of chlorophyll A in order to be considered a healthy lake. If you exceed those, as Golden Lake often did, 2014 and prior, the lake would be listed as impaired, and you would do a TMDL study, total maximum daily load study, to determine the sources of the phosphorus and what you might do about it. Happy to report that since about 2015, there's been a very noticeable decline in total phosphorus and chlorophyll A in Golden Lake. Very noticeable. Likewise, when we look at water clarity, we've seen a pretty dramatic increase in water clarity since about, the mid-2000s. We saw worse water clarity. 2009 it might be a little bit of an aberration there, but more recent years, again, much better water clarity in Golden Lake.
Could you go
Yes, sir.
back a slide, please?
Yes, sir.
So why isn't there a better association with total phosphorus and chlorophyll levels? So like that one bar in 2002 that went way up there, why didn't you see a, matching increase in phosphorus then?
Yeah, good question. There can be other things that control algae blooms other than just phosphorus. Phosphorus is often the driver, but not always.
Okay.
In some cases, we see systems where phosphorus is relatively high, but algae is relatively low, often because there's an abundance of native aquatic plants, and they help promote water clarity. On the flip side of that, we have some lakes where phosphorus is relatively low, and yet chlorophyll A is quite high. Often that indicates the absence of aquatic plants or the presence of a high number of common carp.
Yeah.
So that relationship is not perfect between phosphorus and chlorophyll A, and there are things that can uncouple that relationship.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Oh, thank you.
Here's my quick and dirty summary then for water quality conditions on Golden Lake. These are 10-year averages that we're looking at here. And the reason that I'm using 10-year averages because that is what the state uses when they consider their water quality standards and whether or not a lake should be listed as impaired or not. Or in this case, potentially delisted. I mentioned earlier, and if I scoot back to the data again, Golden Lake used to regularly or almost every year exceed state standards for phosphorus and chlorophyll A. The moving 10-year average now has Golden Lake meeting all three state standards, phosphorus, chlorophyll A, and water clarity.
Can
Yes,
you go
sir.
back to the graph for the water clarity?
Yes, sir.
So the state standard is -1, so
1 meter.
we want to be below that line?
You want the longer bars indicate that. You're right. The two different graphs are a little bit different. In this case, we want to see for total phosphorus and chlorophyll A, we want to see them below that line. For water clarity, we want to see them stretch down across that line.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
longer bars indicate better water clarity.
And
Yeah.
these sets that's Eric Peterson doing it now.
Yeah.
Before then, it was Bill Semple, and before then, we've had a lot of community residents do it, and it sounds like you're also doing it.
We do.
I don't know if our Parks Department does it,
I think just Eric does it.
Eric, and then, but all that data is collected, you have all that. Okay,
Yes,
Great.
correct. Yes, yes.
So, can I ask about the total daily maximum load? You're right, back in that 2009, 10, or whatever, and this might be more for Patrick, maybe, but, we obviously knew we were over that load. We did this work tried to do work with City of Blaine and with our iron enhanced sand filter and things like that to lower that load. And so one of the questions that happens is, this is such an extended discussion. So, this report here that I was holding up earlier is 2003, that talked about this. Now it's 20 years later, and, and the conversation and the technology and everything, the knowledge, expands and grows and evolves. That's cool. But it sounds like some of the things maybe that we did with either the work that we did on the total load, or, you know, putting in the iron enhanced sand, some of these things, we thought they would take out so many pounds of this, we projected this or project that. So somehow, somebody helped me over the last then 10 years of what has what do you think we've done that has caused us to now move, because I assume we're talking about actually moving off of being an impaired lake
And
at some point.
that's the next, you'll get it here next.
So what,
That's the goal of this study that was done in 2003, was it came out after the lake was declared, you know, an impaired water. You know, so the goal was to get it off the impaired list, and now that is set to happen. I think this just happened a day or two ago. The state is recommending this be delisted, so I don't want to.
you tell us
Yeah,
that
Matt,
part,
don't
and
wanna
let's
steal
talk
your-
about how we, tell us what the news is and tell us
Yeah.
how we got there.
Sure, I can tell you what the news is. The news is that the state of Minnesota looks at this water quality data every couple of years and reassesses the status of the lake. In their most recent assessment, they're seeing, just like we are, that the lake is meeting the state standard, that Golden Lake is now meeting all of these state standards. And so they're recommending that Golden Lake be delisted or removed from the impaired waters list. That's a really positive development and a really big deal. This is rare statewide. There's not a lot of delistings. There's thousands of impairment listings and maybe only, less than 50 cases of delistings, I think. In our watershed, in the Rice Creek Watershed, we've had, to date, just one delisting approved. With this current cycle, though, there's several other lakes in Rice Creek that are set to be delisted. Bald Eagle is one, Golden Lake is one, Island Lake, there's one other that I'm forgetting. But overall, this is very rare and a big deal. There was just an article that the Board of Water and Soil Resources did about this, and they talk about Golden Lake. I put the URL on there, but it's hard to, if you Google Golden Lake delisting, you can find that article.
Okay.
And this just happened, a couple days ago? I think the
Yes.
recommendation came out on Friday.
And if you
So
can,
I'll
make sure we get that article.
I'll make sure you guys get it, but that is, like Matt said, it's extremely rare that these things happen, that a lake actually gets delisted, and it goes to talk about how, you know, all the iron enhanced sand filters and everything contributed to the delisting, and, you know, it's very, like I said, very rare that these things happen, so.
That's what I was gonna ask is, what would be the top 2 or 3 reasons that you would cite that would cause the improvement in the water quality?
The projects that I know about are the 2 big iron enhanced sand filter projects. The one associated with the pond out here, and then the one a little bit further up in Blaine by Fleet Farm. I know that there have been other projects. I think that Rice Creek has, over the years, perhaps provided some cost share funding to the city and other partners in this area. Those are the more recent and bigger ticket ones that I'm aware of. I also think that, as Mayor noted earlier, the pond itself is serving a function in collecting and holding those sediments and nutrients before they make their way into Golden Lake.
So what year did we put that in?
Pond, oh God, that goes back to the 80s.
No, the sand filter, was that
Iron Hands.
19 or 20?
That was
It wasn't that long ago.
No, it was. I think we got the grant in 2017. I think we put it in 2018, 2019.
Before COVID.
Yeah,
Before
well, that's what I
COVID.
mean, I thought you said 20 years ago.
No.
it was
Yeah, the pond went in,
5, 6
the
years.
pond went in, 30 years ago, but the iron enhanced sand filter went in, about 5 years ago.
Yeah, yeah,
Blaine's iron enhanced sand filter probably went in about probably 5 years before that.
yeah.
The pond was a part of the Lake Lexington Development Project, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, in that span. That's when it was, there was already a small
Yeah,
pond there.
expanded.
Existing. It was really significantly expanded as part of that development project. So the sand filters, and I think there's one up at Austin Park, up in Blaine too. It's a small little league baseball park up there. I think there's one there, but, which is not very far away, 104th or something. But, any rate, these have worked. I think one of the things that we never do in this business of running cities and counties and states is we never celebrate successes. We get rolled all the time for things that have done wrong, and I'll put the schools in the same category. We do some great work, and it just gets kind of lost in the chatter, and then they're waiting for the next big news story to kind of come. And it isn't about me, but you think about all the people that have been involved, monitoring lakes and and funding, you know, the iron hand sand filter, taking a risk on it. You know, first we did a little pilot thing out there, you know, just a little thing where you get a bucket of water and of course, what was our concern? Well, the concern was, it was pretty clear that when the water came in, just like we talked about before the meeting started, the water came into this little pilot. It was basically a, like, you know, one of those tubs that you bring out to a construction site. You know, we put all the parts in there and we did all this stuff. And it would come in all dirty and cloudy, it would leave nice and clean. And everybody said, oh, this is great, right? And of course, the thing I said was, yeah, but once that lake clears, the water clears, you're gonna have a lot of weeds coming, and that's where we're at now. But boy, that's great. And so whether it's WSB, you know, the work we did with you guys, the work that our staff did to monitor it and stuff, and it takes maintenance, you know, and everything.
Just want to add too, I know that as part of our city street reconstruction project, we've always been trying to implement best practices. We've got that filtration system underneath Golden Lake Park. I think we put one in similar to that up at Carl Eck when we did that project up there. So we've been trying to limit that inflow into the stream and the lake as well, and keep those nutrients out of that water.
Yeah, we have all these huge baffles that go down 15, 20 feet underneath the whole park, the tennis court is and everything else, and all the water coming off the stormwater goes in and goes through there.
Yeah,
What about the sod farms and the farms further down the road? I mean, have they done anything different?
Well, they're gone. That's, you know, that's the best thing to happen.
Some of
for
them are.
Water
So
quality.
that's probably a piece of it.
Yeah, well, now you have best management practices in all those neighborhoods up there, where they all have their own stormwater ponds, so all that runoff is going into the storm sewer, going into a storm sewer pond, then going into ditch 53, 20, you know, 62, then getting down to the pond. So there's so many levels of treatment before the water actually gets to the lake that
Yeah, yeah.
it's inherently getting better as it's
Yeah.
getting down here.
Yeah.
So,
And it's no longer sitting in those peat bogs
Yep.
where it got those tannins, the stain anymore, because it's
They're
just
gone.
coming on, you know, hitting roofs and getting here and going there, and it's moving fast, and it's not sitting for a while. Those stains, of course, played a very important role for us through the 80s and 90s and all these time, because they didn't allow the sunlight to get down through to make those weeds go wild. Now it's clear, and so that, we've crossed that bridge.
I mentioned that there were some other lakes in the Rice Creek watershed that were being delisted. For some of those lakes, answering the question of what was the factor or what was the big project that got there is a little bit easier. I think for Golden Lake, it's really more like there were 5, 10, 12 projects or factors that are leading to this successful outcome.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Do you have more, or do we keep
Oh, yeah.
asking
I-
questions?
I-
We have a lot of
he's
questions.
got
I
10
can-
more.
I can see
Oh, Good,
This is the
good,
fun-
good.
This is the fun part.
I've got a couple more, and thanks for your patience, and I appreciate the questions. Clearer water. Golden Lake is seeing clearer water right now. That does mean more aquatic plants. I'm going to say that that's a good thing. I understand that when you recreate on a lake, and I'll talk more about that there can be a conflict there, and there needs to be, in some cases, some management to allow for recreation to occur. But from an ecologist perspective, healthy shallow lakes have aquatic plants in them. There's really no lakes that have clear water and no plants in this part of the state. If you were to move to a situation where the lake had no plants, you would go back to that scenario where phosphorus levels may not change all that much, but chlorophyll A and algae would shoot way up. And we have examples of that, other examples of that in Rice Creek. I was talking to Patrick earlier about Silver Lake down in the city of New Brighton. They had a situation like that where phosphorus levels were actually fairly low, but the lake experienced some pretty severe algae blooms every year. It's because they had no aquatic plants growing in the lake. So native aquatic plants serve many different important functions. They stabilize sediments on the bottom of the lake so that sediments can't be resuspended with fish activity or with boat traffic or anything like that. They provide habitat for fish and other critters. And they provide a refuge for zooplankton. There's some tiny microscopic critters called zooplankton that actually eat algae. When they have plants to hide in, they can flourish. When they don't have plants to hide in, they get picked off by all the fish. So there's a number of reasons why, but native aquatic plants are a healthy part of, or an important part of a healthy lake. There we go. A good video to learn more about that, if you went on YouTube and looked for Our Lakeshore Connection, There was an effort by, I think it was Anoka Conservation District and a number of other partners, that put together this really interesting video about that. So if you want to learn more about aquatic plants, the role they play in lakeshore issues, that's a really great video. Again, back to that point now that certainly we recognize that in order for recreation to occur on lakes, there can be some management of aquatic plants. From our perspective, it's managing enough to allow for that recreation, but not so much that you're wiping out, a big portion of that aquatic plant population. Aquatic plant management is regulated by the DNR, not the Rice Creek Watershed District, but we do like to work with partners to connect them to the right resources at DNR, connect them to the right people. Depending on the type of aquatic plant you might want to manage, there's 2 different programs. So if it's native aquatic plants, there is some management of native aquatic plants allowed. That would be through the Aquatic Plant Management Program. If it's an invasive species, like curly-leaf pondweed, which I know you have in Golden Lake, or Eurasian water milfoil or other invasive plants, that goes through the Invasive Aquatic Plant Management Program. Permits from the DNR to manage invasive aquatic plants are free. Strongly recommend that you get those permits, any permits to manage native aquatic plants. There are some scenarios where a permit is not necessary, but anytime you use herbicides or want to do larger scale removal of aquatic plants, permit is required from the DNR. I think I've just got a couple of more slides because I can't get out of a presentation without promoting our grant programs at Rice Creek Watershed District. We have a number of grant programs where we like to partner with communities and we like to partner with residents. So if you are a resident of Golden Lake and you have erosion issues on your shoreline, or if you're just a resident of the city and you want to do a better job managing the stormwater coming off of your street, the Watershed District will partner with you. We have a grant program to partner with folks. You can go to our watershed, or our website, learn more about that. We're always willing to partner with willing homeowners. And that's all that I had. I know there's more questions, and I don't want to.
Well, and we've got a bunch of questions, but I want to make sure we have folks in our audience too that may have questions. And so anybody who has to, come on up and sit in the front seat, we'll get it, because we want to make sure he gets his microphone, and then people that watch this video later will be able to hear the questions, hear the answers and stuff. You're right, curly-leaf pondweed is one of the challenges we face, which is an invasive plant that we have to take care of. How does water temperature impact any and all these things? Because a couple things. First off, the lake gets fairly warm, obviously. It's a relatively shallow lake, often 5, 8, 10 feet deep. Hole off of the fishing pier goes down to 25. But that increasing temperatures, it's not like we're up north where it was great for walleyes because it was a cold lake, and now it's getting warm, so it's switching to a bass lake or something. I mean, we always have had warm, but I'm just curious about water temperatures, and if that's we can't do anything about it, but if that's impacting us.
I'm not aware of direct water temperature impacts on aquatic plants, but certainly they can have an impact on fish species. You referenced walleye. They are a cool water species. When they start to get into the warmer water temperatures, their metabolism increases, which means they need to eat more. It also means they're more susceptible to pathogens and diseases and things like that. As you move even further north, and there's the cold water species like lake trout or cisco or things like that. Those fish most definitely are stressed by the warmer water temperatures. Some of the warmer water species like bass and panfish doesn't bother them as much here. I mean, they exist down in Missouri as far south as Texas, where, of course, water's warmer there.
Great to know. Great to know. One of our friends and neighbors, come on up. Dwight, you want to come up and pose a question, and then he or Patrick will give you an answer. Give us your
He's
thoughts.
the expert, so.
Yeah. Dwight Benoit is a very active resident who knows a lot about our lake and water quality.
I was just curious, Matt, on your bar graphs, it looked like those were averaged for an annual season. So, and you were saying that you sample every couple of weeks and test, and so I'm just your sampling, does that vary quite a bit? The test results vary quite a bit through the season?
You come on up, and we're just kind of have a big,
It's a back and forth.
it's around a kitchen table kind of thing here.
Sure. Yeah, variability can be high. I would say back, when we're looking back to the, pre-2010 area, the variability, the within-season variability for total phosphorus and chlorophyll A was much higher. I was just looking at a graph earlier of all of the raw data, and chlorophyll A, for example, at times could be quite low, and then later in the summer could spike to be, 80 to 100 micrograms per liter, which would indicate a very significant algae bloom. More recently, like 2016 to present, variability is a lot lower, and it doesn't change a lot from early summer to mid to late summer.
You could put confidence intervals on those bars and then we'd know.
We could, yeah, that's a great point. These bar graphs are kind of meant for public consumption, but you're right, increasing the complexity of these would give it a better idea of the
Hired
variability.
pharmacist and researcher here.
There we go.
So he's got that in his mind.
Yep.
Good question.
Do you test for nitrogen?
Yes, we do. We do test for nitrogen.
How big a factor is that in in water quality as far as a nutrient?
We do test for nitrogen. Nitrogen can be an important factor in some systems. Generally, it's not the limiting factor. That tends to be phosphorus, which is why that's our focus. In very, very productive systems, Peltier Lake, Centerville Lake, those lakes come to mind, very productive systems. There can be so much phosphorus that nitrogen ends up being the limiting factor, controlling algae blooms. There's some research over the past 10 years that suggests that nitrogen may be kind of a covariate with algae blooms too. We talked earlier about how the relationship between total phosphorus and chlorophyll A is not a perfect one-to-one relationship. There are many variables out there. In some systems, nitrogen may be a covariable that can exacerbate algae blooms.
You can keep going if you got more questions. Okay, that's it for now? Okay.
I'm answering.
Yeah, okay.
So first of all, the actions have been wonderful. I've lived here about 40 years, and there was a time where you could walk on the beach into the water up to your knees and not be able to see your toes. And that was really common. And a couple of years ago, I was in late July, early August, somewhere in there. I walked out on the fishing pier and looked over the edge and says, "Oh, it's not a bottomless lake. I could see the bottom." I was actually surprised. So all these actions have been doing some great things. One thing for actually Patrick mostly, as we're considering weed control, the boat launch is a wonderful example of weeds.
Yes.
Is that I took a rowboat out. Now, if I take my canoe out, there's enough of a pathway that I can scoot through and not do anything. A rowboat sticks out quite a bit further, and I was carrying 20 pounds of weeds on my oars, and I have to shake them off about every second stroke, and there's absolutely no way I could ever go in a straight line rowing and that stuff. And that was just last year. So if it's possible to get that fixed, that'd be really nice, because when I bring my grandkids out fishing, I prefer to get into the lake rather than being stuck in the weeds.
No, we did, I know we did ask Midwest AquaCare, who does the herbicide treatment, to treat more of the area and go further south along the fishing pier towards the boat launch. So we have asked them to increase their treatment area
Yeah.
of our.
All I really care is a pathway
Yeah.
to get out.
Well, I mean, honestly, the pathway is going to be just from repeated use. I mean, that's where.
Well, that's what it is right now.
And that's the best way to get a pathway, but unless you do herbicide treatment.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
no-
there's probably not that very many other people rowing boats out there, so that width isn't really
But
being
there are
used.
people that try it. The landing itself is not in great shape as far as the drop-off and things like that. It's not easy to launch from there.
It's hard to launch into 3 inches of water.
Yeah. But, on the other hand, not having that being wonderful also limits the amount of outside boats that come onto the lake a little bit. And of course, we're also, very worried. We obviously have curly pondweed in spades. We don't, to our knowledge, have Eurasian milfoil. Now, people look at it and say, it's right there. Well, this is a really hard thing to figure one weed from another weed. So we rely on the experts. But there obviously is too much of the curly pondweed, and that's what's causing a lot of the problems.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for all the work, because it's really nice to have a clean lake there.
Patrick, follow-up question on that. Have we ever considered having the parks crew go out there and remove that submergent vegetation to open up that channel so that folks can get boats in and out?
Can they legally do it?
That's a good question. We'd have to probably, it wouldn't be the parks crew, because, we barely have enough time to mow all the grass we have to mow in town. So I don't know how finding an extra, couple days worth of work to remove the vegetation would be possible, but something we could look into. It would be more hiring that out to a scuba do type service that specializes in removing aquatic vegetation.
Didn't we just hire another parks
We did.
person this year?
They're already busy. How long have we been wanting to get another parks person with all the backlog of
Right.
of projects that we've had?
Well, I'm just asking, have we ever evaluated what it would take?
That's not, I wouldn't say that's the specialty of the park maintenance worker. I think more, you're looking, if you're gonna remove that submerged vegetation, you're gonna wanna be hiring that out to a Midwest Aqua Care or a company that specializes in that, because that's what they do.
Yeah, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here a little bit, because I know that there are tens of thousands of Minnesotans out there who are doing this every summer off their own docks, making a path so that they can get the boat out there. And I'm just wondering, if they're able to do it, can we do it with our resources as well? So something to
look
think
into
about.
You could hire Mark to launch his boat more.
That's
often.
true.
Yeah.
We do that as well.
Or I could get another guy and put on a scuba tank and.
By the end of the summer, he'd be looking at this from rowing in, rowing out. Well, you do have a right to have a path out.
Yeah.
And so that's the same, I'm sure, in a sense, for the city as it would be for that. You also have a bigger, I think, as big a problem is getting from the bay to the main lake. That channel right by the fishing pier is just chock full of weeds.
Yeah.
So you have a bay you can kind of get around in somewhat over here in the middle, and you have the big lake, which you can get in part, but that path between is also plugged. So we're looking at some of those kind of things. But you're right, it is a question of having the right kind of equipment. It's really almost like dredging, putting on a huge thing and just scooping and pulling back and stuff. And it is a question of whether it sticks. And whether
Does that spot prevent you from boating around? Can you boat around that patch of weeds, or is it just if you go through it?
you go through it and you get stuck in it. And
But you can't avoid going
you
through it.
can't avoid it, because if you get to the shores, it's worse, so it's just kind of.
And that's where we're talking with Matt, so the homeowner could treat the first 150 feet of shoreline out. That next, however long to the middle of the lake, they can't treat. So that's where we're partnering with Rice Creek to treat that next 150 feet. We were just looking at a map, actually looking at Dave's house. There's quite a bit of that area that could be treated, that is chock full of weeds. It's just figuring out how to pay for that treatment is the key. That's where the Friends of Golden Lake, the lake associations can partner with Rice Creek, and they do have some cost-sharing grant opportunities that could potentially help that kind of middle area of the lake. Because you can treat the shoreline, but you can't really treat the middle unless you're a Rice Creek type organization.
So Dean, for example, and so I signed up most years, sometimes you question the effectiveness of the Midwest Aqua Care herbicides, but, so this year is $600 to do, 50 feet wide, and I don't really think they go out 150 feet, but, that space there, that's about $600 for a homeowner to do that, and so we're talking about the space that's beyond it. Now, in the old days, there would be more weeds in shallow, and then when you got to where 6 feet, 8 feet deep, you wouldn't see the weeds anymore. Now you do because of the, clear water. So I was going to mention, there was a big story in the Star Tribune here a couple weeks ago about curly-leaf pondweed, and it was talking about how with the low amount of snow and low amount of I'm going to say kind of ice and ice cover, that might affect it, and that this could then be a very bad year, was kind of the drift I've caught of the article. Is that fair, or how would you talk about that?
That's fair. There is some research that links milder winters or winters with lower snowpack or thinner ice cover to higher curly-leaf pondweed density. The reason is that curly-leaf pondweed is actually winter annual. It starts growing late in the fall. survives or tries to survive under the ice, and then has a leg up on the competition in the spring. As soon as the ice goes out, it can start growing because it's already sprouted the previous fall. So in years when we have really heavy snow cover and really thick ice, those low light conditions tend to hamper the curly leaf growth, and we tend not to see as much of it. That was the finding of a large study across the state of Minnesota, and I'm not going to refute those findings, but I will say that just like so many things, it's not a perfect one-to-one relationship, and we see a lot of variability within that. Past few years, when we've had quite a bit of snow, we've had some pretty severe curly leaf problems on some lakes. It's entirely possible that this year, even despite the mild winter, there could be some lakes that have less curly leaf pondweed. So it's a general trend, but doesn't always apply to every lake.
Another question I've got is, on the cover of today's newspaper from the Quad Community Press is a story about Centerville Lake and doing an alum treatment. And that was a option 20 years ago and was considered kind of a front runner in the sorts of things we could do. Now, given some of the new data and some of the directions we're going, it may or may not be the best or most effective use. So my question is, not really why Centerville Lake but not this lake, because we know every lake is different, has different problems, and so the solution's different. So is it an alum treatment? Is it a drawdown? Is it managing the invasive species of curly leaf pondweed? Thoughts on these things?
Well, for Golden Lake, I would say that the projects that you've done to date are showing the results that you want to show. Centerville Lake, that's definitely not the case. Centerville Lake has some pretty horrendous algae blooms every summer, and they've actually been getting worse the past 5 to 10 years. An alum treatment is a expensive and fairly, I don't want to say extreme, heavy-handed option. It's a big, expensive project to try and deal with a big, expensive problem that they have there with the sediments in the bottom of the lake. We know that the sediments in the bottom of Golden Lake do have a fair amount of phosphorus in them, and from the measurements that we take, I actually have the data with me, we know that there can be some pretty high phosphorus readings in the deep water, the deep part of the lake, the hypolimnion, just off the bottom of the lake. And yet, that phosphorus does not seem to be making its way up into the surface waters. So the very presence of phosphorus in lake sediments does not necessarily always indicate a problem with algae growth in the surface of the lake. One of the new monitoring programs or initiatives that we have at Rice Creek is looking at thermocline stability, or warm water and cold water stability in the lake. If you've ever, maybe you know about spring and fall turnover, the lake will mix, but then during the summer you tend to have warm water at the surface and colder water in the deeper part of the lake. Those different temperatures will actually create a gradient whereby the two sets of water have slightly different density, and so they won't mix. And so the cold water at the bottom of the lake will not mix with the warm water at the surface of the lake until fall, and when you have fall turnover again. What I suspect, and what we're hoping to verify with data this summer, is that gradient is so strong that phosphorus in the bottom of the lake is never able to make it up into the surface waters to fuel algae blooms.
Oh, interesting.
So then alum treatment really wouldn't be necessary for Golden Lake, because if the phosphorus can't get up there in the first place, it's not going to cause a problem.
Right.
Correct.
Huh.
It's interesting because, I've mentioned this a couple of times, over 20, 25 years, what was once a problem is sometimes no longer a problem. What was once a solution is not the right solution because your problem's changed. If this is making sense, I mean, it kind of goes like that, which is why we rely on experts, both, yourself and folks like Dwight and stuff who stay up on this stuff to kind of help us and guide us a little bit.
Yeah, I know at one point, about 6-7 years ago, we were looking at the alum treatment as a quick fix to make an impact, to show that we were making a difference on phosphorus in the lake. And the decision at that time was, well, let's get the iron enhanced sand filter in, let's get our other preventive filtration methods in, and let's give them some time to work. And looking at it now, I'm glad we did, and it looks like that was the right move to make.
Yep.
And now it's just going to be, managing the weeds. That'll be the next thing is curly leaf pondweed. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask about the, with regard to the alum treatment. My understanding is that dissolved oxygen levels in the water has an impact on whether the sediment phosphorus is released or not. So when it stratifies in the summertime, there's not as much oxygen in the lower levels. And then we've got the aeration system running year-round, and I also understand that there's probably the water changes through the lake probably 4 times a year. So we've got those factors going on as well as far as oxygen levels at various times.
All good questions, yes. One of the other things that we measure in our monitoring program is dissolved oxygen. We can take direct measurements of the amount of dissolved oxygen at the surface all the way down to the bottom of the lake. What we can see in Golden Lake is that it does stratify pretty strongly in summer months where you have warmer water at the top with lots of oxygen, colder water at the bottom, often with very little or no oxygen. And that is indeed correct. It is those low or no oxygen conditions that can lead to sediment phosphorus release or phosphorus, for lack of a better word, leaking out of the sediments, where they were once bound often with iron and in other compounds. In the lack of oxygen, the phosphate will release into the water column. So the data that we have suggests that that is happening on Golden Lake, but again, that high phosphorus water is not able to mix up into the surface waters and fuel algae blooms.
Yeah, stay right there. I'm just going to run down a list of some of the proposed improvements from 21 years ago. And, we've already talked about this. Number one, alum or ferric chloride treatment upstream, treatment in lake. Neither one of those kind of seem appropriate anymore at the time. Lake drawdown in the winter. And then the next one would be the drawdown with the dredging and scraping, trying to get some of that sediment and all that phosphorus out of there. Next one, biomanipulation. Next one, a diversion. At one point, we thought of putting a pipe at the pier at the north end and running, a 2-foot pipe through the bottom and out the other end, and just having, what it was at the time was all the crap water just bypass us. Now, we never had any dream that you would allow that or DNR would allow that, because it is a classic example of pushing the thing downstream. We would, of course, have argued that this lake would have been fine, except for the watershed is so huge it goes into this lake, and it was, the sod farms and all the stuff up north coming in. That, remember, this creek did not come into this lake. This creek ran right by here where we're at and went over to Rice Creek. It never went into the lake. It was brought into the lake in the 1910s as a way of improving sort of water quality so that the lake would be sort of like a sponge and soak up stuff and crap. Of course, it soaked it up. It's full. It can't sort of take anymore. In treatment enhancements upstream of 35W, weed harvesting was a possibility. Herbicide treatment of rooted aquatics, that's, and then it goes through some stuff we talked about before, hypolimnetic withdrawal and expanded aeration system and things like that. But it really was heavy on drawdown and alum treatment in the beginning. And then in the middle is probably where we're at now, sort of this weed management. And people like harvesting. They've seen this, this boat thing that goes in like a combine and harvests over in Lake Minnetonka, and they say we should get one of those. And I think people have said maybe that it was tried a few times back in the 80s or 90s, but I'm not so sure that's, there's always a question of what's allowed, what's effective, what's affordable. You're trying to manage all those pieces. So I don't know if you have it, those are all the stuff from 20 years ago, and some of those things we've moved past or beyond.
Sure, yeah. These studies provide general roadmap. I guess I've seen a number of lakes studies evolve over the years as new technology changes, as new data comes in indicating, what we thought 10 years ago is maybe a little bit different now with this new piece of information. I think some of the things that were referenced in that study were done. Some of the more heavy-handed ones, like a full lake drawdown and dredging, the cost of something like that, there would need to be a pretty significant water quality issue to justify that type of cost. Water level drawdown can be an effective way to deal with curly leaf pondweed, but you do need to expose the entire, or all of the lake sediments where the curly leaf pondweed is growing in order to control it. That's something that we tried on Peltier Lake a number of years ago, I would say with some mixed success there.
And isn't part of it that you need to have a really good hard freeze?
Yes.
And part of the challenge
Yes.
with the times these days is that I think they drew it down, it didn't freeze. They had to
Yeah.
go back and try it again the following year, and everything, so that's part of the challenge too.
Yeah, so when you do that drawdown and it kills off the curly leaf pondweed, what does that do to other vegetation in the lake? Is it similarly impacted, or is that more resilient than the pondweed?
It's a bit more resilient. Curly leaf pondweed primarily grows back from a winter bud. Well, some of the curly leaf pondweed is already sprouted and, would be growing then in the fall, and so the plant itself would be exposed to the freezing temperatures. But also the plant grows back from a winter bud called a turion, which, as I understand it, is more susceptible to drying out or desiccation when it freezes like that, whereas native plants are not as susceptible to that.
Got it.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, and it is great to have you on our team. First off, we thank you very much for being here tonight, for caring about our lake, and for helping us. It seems like the challenge then is that, we know what we thought, we've got new information, which means maybe we have a couple of new approaches, and it would really be great for the two of you, to sit down and continue your work together and try to figure out what would be sort of two things. One would be, what would be the sort of city watershed, maybe state kind of program response, what kind of things can we do? And then also, I think we've had some fairly good success, and we want to continue working on this, with resident activity. Whether it's, Matt's got the world's best rain garden in his front yard, that was part of the funded projects, right? And we have people that might want to do their lakeshore. We have people, we've hit hard on, we sweep streets more often. We sweep streets at different timings now than we used to do it 20 years ago to try to catch crap before it goes down in.
That's great.
So there's two sides. There's the city and the public sector kind of bigger maybe approach, and then there's the individual ones. I know we're looking at how many homes do the plant management, like I do it. There's a certain number of houses for the lake. There's 90 homes in the lake, I think.
Only 10 do it.
And there's a certain portion that can do that, and then there's this. So we can look at some of these things, try to figure out where we're at and what's the path going forward for us. This year, next year, over the 5 years, what's that next iron and hand sand filter kind of project that can have such good success that we've had? And then, we'll help fund it or lobby for it at the Capitol. We'd love to be a great part of a pilot programs or whatever. It'd be neat to take and get delisted and then build from that. Instead of saying, okay, we're done, to say, okay, we have some weed management, but then even beyond that, we want to maintain and sustain a quality approach to this. And that takes homeowners and it takes organizations. So we're really glad to have you on our team.
Yeah.
Patrick, what do you want to say here?
No, I think, Meredith, you hit the nail on the head. I think, what's the next step of the lake? Now getting it delisted is huge, and, we gotta take it to the next level and see what we can, keep it that way, keep it delisted. Now that we got it here, but don't wanna lose it, so that'll be the next battle, is making sure that we, keep up on all the things that we're required to do with, our MS4 permit and all that, make sure our street sweeping's, up to date, make sure people are, participating in the adopted drain program, all these other things that help, all these little things that help, even the Boy Scouts painting the storm sewers with, with their, the paint and stencils. I mean, all these little things add up to something big, so. And working with, Rice Creek is gonna be huge moving forward, and, working with the Friends of Golden Lake, looking at what we can do with that organization, get that organization up and moving, and, I think we have good things, in the future.
Yeah. Do we have a sense of timing on the delisting? I mean, is that something that might happen spring, summer, fall, or is that next year?
60-day window, I think.
Yeah, it's my understanding that that can be a little bit of a drawn-out process. We saw the proposed delistings almost a year ago now, but I think there's the 60-day comment period, and then I think that needs to go to the EPA for federal approval. So there's a number of steps before it becomes official.
So it could be spring, summer, fall, it could be next year.
Could be.
Make sure
That's all right.
we want to make sure we know when it is, we want to have a party of some sort.
Okay.
Could be the 75th.
Yeah, it could be happening during our 75th anniversary.
There we go.
A delisting party.
Another fireworks going off. No, but we really should. A lot of people put a lot of work into that, whether it was just thinking it through or individual actions. Putting in a rain garden, watching where they're blowing their leaves and clippings onto the street, all the kind of things that people do make a difference. We want to celebrate that. Any other comments, guys?
No, thank you so much. Cool.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. Okay, with that, anything else that people want to mention? Looking for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay,
Second?
we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.